How's it going, everyone? Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the Stratix platform. So Stratix, for those of you who are not familiar, is a Rockwell Automation series of managed as well as unmanaged switches. And we will be, again, talking specifically about how to get started with Stratix, how to implement certain functions with Stratix. You have more than 400 pages worth of user manual. There's a lot of different features we want to be aware of, but also dissect, understand as we are deploying some of those OT networks. Now, in this introductory lecture, what I want to do is basically explain some of the options that you have when it comes to Stratix, and we're going to look at some of the data sheets as well as manuals in just a moment. But before that, I want to answer the fundamental question as to why you would want to choose Stratix over any other platform. Because at the end of the day, and I'm assuming you will do some of your own research, but Stratix is a premium platform. It does not come cheap, but it does play well with the Rockwell ecosystem. So what I'm going to start here is, again, the why, which is an important question to answer. And reason number one is it integrates well into Rockwell. So Rockwell is going to have different features that we'll talk about in just a moment, but basically it allows you to talk to the PLCs in a way that gives you the opportunity to program and get some of the statuses from your switches into your control systems. Now, whether that's an important feature or not entirely depends up to you, but ultimately you do not have that native flexibility with the other platforms. You may, of course, have AOIs and UDTs and basically add-ons that will allow you to do that with the other modules, but it's not going to be out of the box. The second point on the Rockwell side, again, is you have what's called TechConnect, right? So TechConnect is going to be a support system for large enterprise typically, for which you need to pay, but ultimately you can pick up the phone, dial someone that understands the Stratix line, and ask them questions when it comes to the technical side, when it comes to maybe some of your commissioning projects, maybe you work for a systems integrator. So ultimately you will get a lot more support if you have TechConnect and you do purchase the Stratix switches versus some of the other brands. Of course, you have similar type of support from the other switches and manufacturers, but if you're already paying for TechConnect and you have a good relationship on that side, it would be something to consider. Now, we've talked about Rockwell. The other thing is Cisco, right? So Cisco is a highly reputable brand, and I've shown some of their switches. Again, you can have different opinions, but at the end of the day, they are some of the most utilized hardware as well as tools on the manufacturing floors, especially for large enterprise. And what you will notice if you look at Stratix, I'm just going to find the logo here that I can show you very well on camera, is that it will be labeled as a Cisco switch. So what you will find is, for those of you that haven't probably maybe have taken the CCNA or CCIE, depending on the exam, CCNP, obviously you have a Cisco switch inside of the Rockwell shell, so to speak. And if you are familiar with the CLI or the command line interface, the iOS system for Cisco, you can use that knowledge to configure the Rockwell switches just as you would a normal Cisco switch. So underneath the hood, it is the Cisco hardware that will be basically driving the performance of your Stratix line. Now, of course, outside of those is distributors. So distributors, meters. And so again, there's going to be some nuances depending on the size of your organization, depending on the relationship that you have with the distributors. You might get priority support, or you might be basically left hanging when it comes to some of this hardware. But ultimately, you should be considering which distributors you already work with. And a lot of times, if you're working with Rockwell distributors, you will get basically a better support if you continue to purchase more hardware as well as more licenses for, again, your PLCs and HMIs, if you stay within the ecosystem. If you're going to go outside while having the Rockwell control system, of course it will be a little bit more difficult for you to understand. Going back to the Rockwell side, again, you will have a very similar feel. So if you work with Compact Logix PLCs, if you work with Control Logix PLCs, you will have generally a similar feel of the UI or the interfaces. You can configure the switches via RS links in some instances. You're going to use similar tools, so you're going to remain on the same, again, ecosystem, and you're not going to struggle as much by switching to a different platform. The last thing I do want to mention, again, to re-emphasize the Rockwell side, and so if you're going to be using some of the advanced features of the Stratix switches, for example, DLR or NAT, you can use them much easier directly from some of the interfaces you're already familiar with, whether that's Studio or RSLogix 5000, or directly the web UI for the switches. And it's generally easier to set up some of those functions if you're familiar with other Rockwell tools than it is to migrate to any other platform. So here I'm going to just put in UI, and I'm also going to put in some native integration into some of the features, like I said, DLR. And so when you have DLR, for example, we're going to talk about that as a feature on the Rockwell side. Of course, a lot easier with some of the modules if you stay within the ecosystem. All right, so here we are looking at the Stratix Industrial Networks infrastructure at a glance. These documents are attached in this section, so I highly encourage you to download them and take a look at the different available options of when it comes to hardware. There's going to be some specialty modules like the 1783 and ATR card. There's one of them behind me on the wall. It is a specialty module. It is not a router or a switch per se. We'll talk about that in a separate conversation. That being said, there's going to be the Stratix 4300 series, the unmanaged 2000 series, lightly managed 2500 series. Again, we can get into a debate or a conversation what that truly means. There's going to be the Stratix 5700 series. That is the switch that I had shown you that was in my hand in front of the whiteboard. We have the Stratix 5200 series, the 5400 series, 5800 series, and more of a rack-mounted switch 5410. We're going to have a lot of different variations. So again, if we keep scrolling down, you'll see a lot of them repeated, but you also have the different part numbers for the switches listed. This is not a complete data sheet, so this is only going to be at a glance. You will have some different options. What kind of features does each one of them have? What is possible? How many different ports do they have? And ultimately, this is something that will be an important question as you design your networks. So highly recommend that you refer back to this manual. However, the more important is going to be your user manual, which is where a lot of the information is going to be located. So as you can see here, we have the 5700 switches, we have the Armor Stratix, again, rugged type of switches that you will see on your machines. We have the Stratix 8000 as well as 8300 series switches. That is something we'll discuss as well. I have one of them all the way in the upper corner, if you can see through the camera, but ultimately this is where you will learn how to configure your ports, how to configure the VLANs, how to configure some of the layer 3 features, how to configure network address translation protocol, and a variety of different other options, many of which are not necessary for you to get started and get configuring on the OT side. That being said, I highly encourage you to basically look at the manual. I had a printout, a physical copy of this at a certain point in time with a lot of different sticky notes so that I could refer back and understand where these switches actually come in. You will notice that there's also going to be a breakdown of different switches, the number of ports, the capabilities of the ports. But ultimately, what I do want to get into is you will have a section that once again describes each family of different switches, because this is ultimately what will dictate what kind of features you need, but also what are some of their limitations. And some of the examples include, in this case, we have the 5700 series that I showed you. highly ruggedized layer 2 managed switch available in 6, 10, as well as 20 port versions. There's going to be a couple more. You will notice that there's going to be some fiber optic ports as well into which you can insert cards and do some high speed basically communication. You also have your Stratix 8000 as well as 8300 series switches. Very interesting configuration because you can basically purchase the switch, but you can also add on modules to expand the capability of the main switch. So ultimately, you can configure a much greater number of ports on a single device through those extensions. And as you can see here, it also supports fiber, it supports SFP modules, power over Ethernet, as well as a variety of other options. And like I said, if you want to get into these specifics that you will get or will not get on a specific switch, you can either find that here or in some of these selection modules for the specific product and or part number.